We've got
Yes.
17 people in, so welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name's Anj up here. I think I know most people in here, but I know there's a combination of some ICRA Fund folks as well. So yeah, we know this hour is going to go really quick, so thank you for spending your evening with traveling school and technology. Not what we're used to, but it's the Living Room Learning Series. And we're excited for tonight's session with, a topic very near and dear to our hearts, all about girls' education. And our host, Genevieve, has dedicated so much of her life, mostly professional life, to empowering young women around the globe. So I don't even know if the first one was with the traveling school, but she was very influential at the traveling school. And now she's the founder of ICRA Fund. So with that, Genevieve, I'm going to pass it along and start going.
Thank you, Anj. So wonderful to see you all here. This is like a dream come true to marry the worlds of a traveling school and ICRA Fund together, because the traveling school was so influential in the path that I've taken with ICRA Fund over the past decade. So first, it looks like just to their traveling school teachers, administrative staff, traveling school alum from past semesters. And then we have three founding board members. Two founding board members and one current board member on Zoom as well. Chrissy Monahan, who's also connected with the traveling school, is with us. She's going to help facilitate this evening as well. Natasha Kazmi is one of our board members that has joined us from New York, and Rahat Asfar is also going to be on this call on the Zoom. I see her there, who's joining us as well. So we're all thrilled to be here. And I'm going to start sharing my screen so that the stories this evening will also come with images. How are we doing there? Is everyone looking at the Houché Valley?
Looks good.
Oh, good. So working with the traveling school, we all know the traveling school lens, whether you're a teacher or a student, right? So before we travel to a place, we already become immersed in this place. Before we begin studying and learning about a region, we want to better understand the geography, the location, the place, the resources, the culture, the history, the language, the science, everything that we can try to better understand. And then we immerse ourselves throughout travel. And while we're traveling, we learn even more. And this was the lens and the experience that I was bringing with me in 2007 after 4 or 5 trips with the traveling school. I was invited to go to Pakistan with a climbing expedition who is going to be trekking up this valley for a few more days past the last village, the last road, all the way into the mountains to set up base camp to climb some big bad peak that had never been climbed. And I'd been invited to go with them, but along the way to spend 3 weeks checking out some areas of rural Pakistan and volunteering at schools. Since my background was in education and teaching with the traveling school, my friends who invited me along in this expedition thought that I'd get a kick out of checking the schools out. So with that traveling school lens, after being invited to go to Pakistan, I of course said, heck yes, I would like to go to Pakistan, because I actually had to go home that evening and then look at where exactly I was going on a map, and started trying to understand and learn the basics. But I began to prepare like a traveling school teacher. So I began to learn about the geography, about educational development there, coming in as a teacher, about the local economy. I learned, for example, that here Pakistan is a nuclear country bordering another nuclear country, India. On its east side. On the north, it is bordering China, this economic superpower. On its west, it's bordering Afghanistan, which at the time was and still is a war-torn country. And then the United States, I was learning more about the United States role in Pakistan and what we had been investing in over years. So much of it was military, for military support, both on the Indian border and the Afghan border, which was essentially creating not the most peaceful situation to be flying into at the time in 2007. So all of these things I was learning about Pakistan, but really that's not what I wanted to know. What I wanted to know is, like at the traveling school, what you're going to learn when you meet the local people, when you spend time in the homes, when you travel down the streets, when you visit these villages and practice the language to get enough giggles and laughs out of the locals that they invite you in for tea. So that was my goal. So I went in to, let's see, I'm trying to skip forward on this, but it's not letting me. One moment. Oh, there we go. So I'd like you all to take out a piece of paper or use your phone or computer or begin taking notes in your head. This is an expanded traditional KWL, like we might do at the traveling school, or what I still do as an adult when I'm entering something that is new to me and about to learn something that I hope will blow my mind. I want to first kind of wrap my brain around what I already know. That's the K. I'm already asking questions. Oh, what do I want to know? What do I want to learn here? What do I want to learn tonight? I hope that you all are starting to think that way right now as we're diving into this really important topic of girls' education related to the environment, related to global climate change, related to global geopolitical issues, political issues, and the local economies, using Pakistan as a case study. So what are you hoping to learn tonight? And what are you thinking about? How are you going to find that out? If it's not for me tonight, any other resources from people in this group, then how might you learn some more of this information outside of this Zoom call? Continue to take note of what you've learned, because hopefully there could be some new topics for future discussion or future research, new information tonight. Think about that. The last two items on this KWHLAQ chart is the A and the Q. These are what we're going to focus on during a breakout session at the end of this call. So I'd like for you to take special note on what action will I take? Tonight, I hope you're inspired at some point that it inspires you to take future action. And through that inspiration, hopefully it also develops new questions for you. So what new questions do I have? So take note of those. What action will I take and what questions do I have? And we're going to talk about those a little bit later. So going back to Pakistan with my traveling school lens, in true traveling school style, I was going there as a tourist, better understanding my role in this new country, in this new place with these cultures and traditions. One piece of advice that somebody who had spent a lot of time in Pakistan gave me as a young woman from the United States is to throw out any feminist ideals I had, any feeling of female empowerment. Just throw them out the window, leave them behind, because you're going to go to a place where you'll, in these rural, conservative, very conservative areas, you're going to need to conform. You're going to need to cover up. You'll need to look down when you're in the room with men. You'll need to walk behind men often. You won't be the first person to speak in the room. You may not be invited into the room with the men. So prepare yourself. And that was one of the pieces of advice that I took with me on this first trip. And I just really became the observer. but I wanted to know, how do I get past just being the observer? How do I really start to better understand the role of girls and the role of women? And me as a former traveling school science teacher we were talking so much in the traveling school about environmental science education, global warming, climate change, the local environment. How do I learn more if I am this passive observer being respectful of a conservative culture that is a male dominated culture? I was covering my head. I was definitely not the person. I was with a group of men who were going on this expedition, and when local people were talking with our group, if they had any question for me or wanted to talk to me, it would always be through the men in the group. So would Miss Genevieve like a cup of tea? I'd be standing right here. They'd be asking my male person that I was with the question. And it was in a very respectful way. I never once felt disrespected. It was actually out of the utmost respect, I think, that they had for me as a foreign woman. But I was not being engaged with directly. That was until I was invited by the women and the girls into the kitchen, into the rooms where they were studying, away from the men where it was only girls and women around. And then all of a sudden headscarves would, come down, or laughter would erupt and stories would unfold. And that's where I began to understand this amazing country, this amazing region in northern Pakistan. And I began to really better understand during these first few weeks of traveling the complexities of a country that was founded in 1947 after partition from India, and became the Islamic country of Pakistan, embraced in this Islamic history and tradition. And it was also a country that I was quickly learning that only had less than half of its school-aged population in school. And here I was in the rural regions, the very remote areas of northern Pakistan, in these tribal areas that weren't even considered in the census data with the government. So when I'm looking at government data for Pakistan that talk about how only half of the school-age population in Pakistan has a school education, and less than half of that school-age population going to school are girls. Fewer than that are girls. They aren't taking into account these areas that I was traveling through, where I was finding very few girls in school. And if they were going to school, they were these brave young girls going to a boys' school. And then all of the grandmas and aunties and older girls that I was meeting and being invited in to sit with them, I hadn't yet met any girl who was a teenager or older that had an education. And so to be able to discuss with them, I was working with local translators. I was able to travel with a woman who was able to translate for me on this first trip in these rural areas, or I'd find a young girl that had been going to school and knew English. But I was finding that these national statistics that I was learning about Pakistan weren't even really representing the northern areas. One of the first parts of Pakistan that I visited in 2007 was Azad Kashmir, and it had been devastated by an earthquake 2 years before. Now, tonight I'm going to be talking about girls and women and their vulnerability to devastating climatic events, devastating weather events, especially due to global climate change. While this wasn't an event that was because of global climate change, it was from an earthquake, it still helped show the vulnerability that women and girls have when they're expected to stay at home, tend to the fields, tend to the families, not really leave or go beyond their home or their property. They don't have access to resources. They aren't literate. They don't go to the market. Then when an event like an earthquake happens, they're trapped at home. So this young girl on the right side of your screen in the blue camise there, her name is Ikra, and she's the namesake of our organization. She's one of the first girls that I met. And she and her family told me how after this earthquake in 2007, homes and schools collapsed, and many of those who lost their lives were the mothers and children who were left at home. But Ikra was so determined to continue learning that she helped lead essentially a little homeschool in some tents in her village after her school and many of the homes collapsed. And her dedication to education and her father's support are why we named this organization, our organization, Ikra Fund. She was also one of the first girls to really welcome me, bring me in, and tell me all sorts of jokes that helped me feel welcomed and at home in Pakistan, and ready to really get to know the people. So here I was a few weeks into my first trip. I traveled through Azad Kashmir, along the border of India, which right now no foreigners are able to go. It was actually a fascinating trip into this area that had been closed off to foreigners for decades. But after the 2005 earthquake, so it was about a year and a half, 2 years after the earthquake that I traveled there, they had opened the borders to foreign aid. And with that foreign aid came televisions and cell phones. And so I was able to spend some time in this area that had only recently been introduced to foreigners, Westerners, and media. And that's where I ended up focusing, starting that next year. I focused my doctoral research in that region of Azad Kashmir, which was very fascinating to be working with these women and girls who, prior to the earthquake, a few years before I was there, had never sat with a foreigner, had never watched a television, had never talked on a telephone. And to see what sort of progress can happen in a region after you bring in, or what change can happen in a region after you bring in that kind of progress was fascinating. But traveling after this first trip, still in this traveling school teacher traveling lens and perspective, I was just soaking it all in. Pakistan was blowing my mind. I was visiting these schools that had collapsed after the earthquake. Students are still desperate to learn. I was learning why Pakistan only had half of its students in school, better understanding the role of tourism in the northern areas. And then finally, we traveled up to another tribal area up north where these photos were taken, and where we started trekking in the mountains. And I met mothers like Parveen. Parveen here, as you can see, is carrying, at the time she was my age. So I was 28 years old when I traveled to Pakistan my first time, 29 years old. And she was the same age as me. And this was her 5th child on her back. And she was heading into the field. She was going to trek for a few hours into the fields with her. She had a few other children with her, running along with her goats and sheep. And she was about to spend the evening up with her livestock in the mountains. And so there were a few blankets in her basket for her and her children to cuddle up and stay warm, so that they could keep their animals safe. And then the next day, she and the kids would come back down and restock. And I imagine she did that quite a few times throughout the summer. Parveen's story was like every other woman's story that I met in these villages. These girls and women were getting married at 14 or 15 years old, and they started having children. So by the time they were 27, 28, 29, they were having their fifth child. Children were everywhere. They were running around because most of them weren't going to school. I would, as you see in the upper right-hand corner, that photo was taken as I was driving in a Jeep in these villages that they don't have running water or electricity or cell phone. So there's really no way to get communication from one place to another except for humans traveling by foot or maybe by motorbike or by the the prayer microphones. So what the imams or the religious leaders use for the call for prayer multiple times a day, they will also use that to send messages up a valley and up to the next village. And so sometimes when I would be thinking that I'd be hearing the call to prayer, they would also be sending a message to the next villages over. And that's how on this trip, and then the dozens of trips that followed, people would know that I'd be coming. And so this photo was taken after I had rounded a corner, rounded a bend with a Jeep, and we had to go through a water crossing. And so you have to plan when you're traveling through these valleys that are at the base of some of the highest peaks in the world. You have to plan your travel through these washes before the day heated up the snow above the wash or heated up the glaciers enough that it would get flooded out. Because by the afternoon, the wash would be too flooded to drive through. Now, we were traveling early enough so that we were able to drive through the wash, round the corner, and all of these children had heard we were coming. So they stood in the road to stop the Jeep. And I was thinking, okay, this is going to be interesting. Like, what's going on here? So we get out, they lay out a blanket. Their fathers and the elders of the village were the ones that had the children stop the car. They wanted to talk to us because they heard that we were traveling and there was a teacher in the car and she was visiting the schools and she was here to talk about education. So I sat with the children hovering around. They wanted to hear every little bit of this conversation because it had to do with education, and it turned out they were desperate to go to school. The village downriver from them had a school. The village upriver from them had a school, but their village was right in between these two washes that every afternoon flooded to the point that children could not cross the washes coming home from school in the afternoon. They had tried, and there had been tragedies from failure, as you can imagine what could happen if young children coming home from school get caught in a flood like that. So these children were there to see if there was any possible way that this teacher visiting from the United States, traveling with a climbing expedition crew, could somehow bring a school for them so that they didn't have to risk traveling to the upper village or the lower village. The children's desire for education, I've never seen like it. Not only that, but the photo below is a mother in a kitchen, another mother who's in her late 20s, early 30s, has multiple children of her own. She got married when she was 14 and started having children before her body was fully developed. You wonder why there's some of the highest infant and maternal mortality rates in the world in this region. You're looking at their stories right there. These young mothers in their 30s, possibly having their 8th pregnancy, already having lost a few of their children before the age of 2 or 3. They all have an auntie or a cousin or a sister who died during childbirth. That's the reality here. So we wonder why these children are desperate for education. It's because this is the future that they have if they don't go to school. They're getting married at 14. They're carrying their 5th child on their back before the age of 30 to go tend the livestock in the fields. If they have a chance to go to school, these mothers and these children know that their futures are going to be very different. So this was my takeaways from my first trip to Pakistan. Okay, I get it. Girls' education is important, right? We just heard a few stories why that is. Girls and women will be healthier if they have an education. Globally known, this is, big picture data here. They're going to have fewer children. Why is that? Why are educated girls going to have fewer children? Think about that one. This is a really important piece of data that I'd like for you to take away with you this evening. Educated girls are going to have fewer children. Hold on to that one. We're going to continue discussing that in a little bit. Educated girls are going to marry at a later age. If a girl is in school, like in this photo, she's one of our middle school students. If she did not have access to schooling, she'd be married by this age right there. But because she's going to school, the parents hold off on marriage. So if she continues through high school and even at the university level, she might not get married until she's in her 20s. Okay, educated girls and educated mothers will enable better healthcare and education for their children, right? So if a mother's educated, she's going to have access to better healthcare. She's going to have she will be more knowledgeable and have access to the resources to provide her children with better healthcare, to provide herself with better healthcare, and to provide a better education for her children. Educated women will be able to participate in formal labor market. So if a woman is educated, if she knows the basics of mathematics, imagine how powerful she'll be heading to market with the fruits and vegetables and meats that she has raised, that she has grown. Educated women will earn higher incomes, and due to that, they will lift their households and communities and nations out of poverty. So here we are in Pakistan, where more than half of the women do not have access to education. And I began imagining what would happen if this geopolitically, economically, and environmentally very significant nation, if half of this population of theirs, girls, had a quality education. What could happen if Pakistan, this nuclear country, bordering another nuclear country where they oftentimes, India, where they oftentimes have tension. It is one of the gateways for Western China sends so many of its goods through Pakistan along the Karakoram Highway. They've invested millions of dollars in road infrastructure so they can get their goods from Western China to where they can export them in Karachi on a waterway. And so they have this interesting economic relationship with an economic powerhouse there, and its relationship with Afghanistan. It really got my head spinning, like, okay, so we get why education is so important for girls related to basic human rights and this list of reasons that we have right here. But what about Pakistan specifically? Like, what not only with Pakistan specifically, I wanted to know more. So I was really beginning to wanted to dive deep. And when I came home from my trip on that first visit to Pakistan, I came home and put together a proposal to start my doctoral research on better understanding girls' education, especially within Pakistan, and how to make it work there, because something wasn't working. Girls were not being reached. Girls were not able to go to school. And I understood the importance of why they needed to go to school. And as I began to dig and dig and dig, especially as an environmental science education teacher, I began to uncover some very powerful statistics and data that I think we right now, as we're understanding our role in connection to the environment, especially related to global climate change, and in our current political climate with countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, China. I have been uncovering, and through my research and experience in Pakistan, can now say, and as a former traveling school teacher of all girls groups, that the magic bullet is educating girls, period, by far. I mean, providing girls with a quality education and a global experience. We've already seen when you provide this at the traveling school with girls from the United States, our girls can become unstoppable. You just wait, watch, and see, right? When you do this for girls in a place like Pakistan, we're seeing the same kind of ripple effect, but more so. I believe it's amplified. So let's look at environmental, economic, and political benefits to girls' education and really relate this to what we're seeing in Pakistan. So educated women are going to have more productive agricultural plots, and they'll be more effective stewards of food, soil, trees, and water. So when we're talking about environmental degradation and wanting to increase the ability to better steward or better conserve our food resources, to help make sure that our soils are sustainable for agricultural reasons, to grow trees for not only for fuel, but in regions where they are very effective carbon sinks, and water resources. You look at the greatest way to be a steward of all of these important resources is to make sure that the women who are tending to those resources are well educated. So back to this, educated girls having fewer children. Girls' education directly correlates with population growth. So there's a direct relationship here with girls' education and population growth. So first, let's talk global. So the projections for global population growth right now, between now and 2050, we project it to grow from 7.3 billion people to 9.7 billion people in the next 30 years. Now imagine how that number would be 2 billion fewer in 25 years from now if girls' education continues to expand. So if what we're doing to bring awareness for and creating action around girls' access to education globally in regions where girls do not have access to education, those population numbers will lessen by 2 billion people. Now connect that to the environment. So why is this important? Why are we talking about population growth and how population growth lessens is reduced because of girls' education? Well, having one fewer child is estimated to reduce more carbon monoxide emissions, to reduce them more effectively than all of these other ways that we are saving the earth combined. So, right, we talk about recycling, of course. We talk about eating a plant-based diet. That lessens our impact on carbon emissions. Right, we can change our household light bulbs. A few of the things that are not on this list. It is much greater. I'm doing the math in my head. I believe it's 5 times greater, a greater reduction of carbon emissions of having one fewer child than it is if you do not drive a car or fly. If you stop flying or driving a car in 1 year, but you have one fewer child for that year, your carbon footprint is less. And so we aren't just talking about as an individual here. It's not just your one less child, it's one less child globally. Talking about this in a region in Pakistan where women are getting married at 14 and starting to have children, and they have not been provided an education, so they do not have agency or power around or decision-making power in her household to say whether or not she wants to have a child. Now, of course, these mothers love their children. Every mother I've met over there, whether she was 13 or 17, having her first or 8th child, she loves her children. But did she have a choice to start having children? If she didn't go to school, no. If she did go to school, is she going to have 10 children? Very likely not. Does that directly relate to what we're talking about with global climate change and the environment? Absolutely. The last 2 bullet points touch on economic and political benefits to girls' education. An increase to women's income, specific example of how an increase to women's income of $10 has the same beneficial impact to a man of $110. If you provide a woman with an income, she's going to spend that money on her household and the benefits of health benefits and education benefits to her children, where that doesn't always happen with a man's income. Last point, education increases women's ability to influence a more democratic and stronger community. Children and communities are less vulnerable to extremism. One takeaway from my trips to Pakistan are how community leaders who want to open up schools for girls in their area, community leaders of very conservative villages, talk about how if their future mothers are educated and if their daughters are educated, their community will be stronger, and it would be less likely that individuals from religious extremist groups could come in and influence any sort of, or take any sort of power in that community. And so community leaders are invested in girls' education in that way to strengthen their communities. So we've touched on the importance of girls and women's education and its relationship to, especially to global climate change. Now, I think it's important to look at the vulnerabilities that girls and women experience environmentally, economically, and politically. And the first point is specifically related to climate change. Now, if girls are uneducated, they are going to be much more vulnerable to social and economic and health impacts of climate change, whether it's droughts, floods, storms, or heat waves. In Pakistan right now, it is flood season. There's spring flood season, there's fall flood season, just like those creeks and rivers that I was talking about that flood during the day because of glacial melt off or snow melt. We see that in all of the waterways, and women are the ones who are especially vulnerable to this. And it is related to their access to education. Girls and women who are out in the fields and working are, and who are dependent on the agriculture and crop production and working in the fields, do have more exposure to the extreme climate change and weather change events. And going down, so women's mortality rates are higher than men's mortality rates. We are seeing more women and girls dying because of climate and weather events. We're also seeing an increase in human rights abuses, human trafficking, sexual violence in temporary shelters. So anytime we are hearing about in the developing world about monsoon floods or hurricanes or landslides or earthquakes that are cutting off regions, we start really thinking about what is happening with girls and women in this area, especially those who, again, do not have agency because they do not have education. They have been expected to stay in the home. They don't know how to reach out for resources. Their income generation is going to be more disrupted. There will be a disruption to the access that they have for healthcare. And then when events do happen, like floods or fires, girls are more at risk to be pulled out of school and their domestic labor will be increased. So we look at who is in charge of the cleanup, who is in charge of pulling these families and communities out of some huge environmental disaster or natural event that's happening because of climate change, because of climate changes and weather pattern changes. Girls and mothers they're the ones that are going to be focused on the domestic labor back in the fields. If girls become a liability because as a dependent of a family, that is also going to increase exposure to early marriage. And then there is an overall increase in perpetuating this intergenerational poverty and vulnerability and marginalization. So it's this cycle that continues, and it's going to increase and continue the more we're seeing. I mean, it's in our faces here in the US. There are fires all over the West. It's happening globally as well. And so if you imagine these weather events due to climate change happening all over the world, begin to imagine places similar to Pakistan where half of the population, these girls and women, haven't had access to education. What is going to happen to them? So how do we get them into school? What can we do about this? It's very important. I mean, not only are educated girls going to make the earth less vulnerable, it'll strengthen our chances to decrease carbon emissions, to decrease population growth, to increase our strength in adjusting to and being less vulnerable to global climate change. Educating girls, it is what we can do to help move the needle. So how do we do it? This is where, in just a minute, we're gonna spend about 8 minutes in a breakout group to discuss with your group actions that you are inspired to take or questions you still have in, wow, okay, girls' education in the developing world is a key way that we can move the needle in not only access to basic human rights for this very important population globally, but to move the needle is related to global climate change. So I'll leave this slide up, but I'd like for us to go into our 2 breakout groups. Chrissy Monahan will be in one breakout group, and I will be in the other. And the notes and the ideas that you've stored for actions that you are interested in, actions you think are important, actions related to you, and questions that you still have, we're going to do a round circle just for about 6 to 8 minutes, and then come back as a large group and close up the session. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. If anybody gets left out, I will be out so I can help you back into a breakout room. But here we go.
Is an ICRA board member, and Janae and I have gone on a traveling school trip together.
Number 2.
Yes. Let's see. Janae, have you been on a trip or with as a student or taught anyone else in this group right now?
I have been a faculty member for 2 semesters. The only one that I have is on the other group, and I'm also on the traveling school board.
Awesome. Great. It looks like Natasha is on here as well, one of our board members. And then I believe everybody else is traveling school alum or faculty. So great. I'm handing this over to you guys. We're gonna popcorn it because we don't have a whole lot of time. What are you inspired by as far as action and possible questions and how to move this forward?
I was just very surprised to hear, like, not surprised, but, affirmed that the direct correlation to the environment the girls' education has. And we're seeing this in overpopulated cities. For example, my hometown is Karachi. It's a big city. And in the past few weeks, it was badly ravaged with floods, urban floods. My own sister's house was badly flooded, no power. And really, people in these countries are very frustrated. And they're looking for answers. They're blaming the government, but really, environment is playing a big role, and this definitely is a step in the right direction.
Do you see in the urban areas, Mahira, that women and girls the population that haven't had an access to quality education there, that are more expected to stay at home or working at homes, are they more vulnerable in situations like this?
Definitely, they are the worst off. They are, like you said, they have many children. They do not have access to better jobs. As such, they live in dwellings that, even the basic necessities are not there. So they are definitely worse off. I feel like the ones who are educated are way better. They're protesting, they're asking questions of the government, and it's very sad to see that the most vulnerable population is definitely the one that does not have access to education, and that has to change.
Thank you for bringing up that. We didn't discuss the urban areas much, and
I mean, this is the urban areas. I'm imagining, it's way worse in the areas that ICRA is operating in.
Well, not necessarily. Yeah, you see, I mean, we the same sort of demographic makeup as in the cities as well. Mm-hmm. You have those with access and those who don't have access. to education, and without education, you don't have access to resources. And when things happen that are like these extreme events, flooding, fires, earthquakes, landslides, places being cut off, droughts, extreme heat, so much of this is, taking people's lives, people's access to healthcare, and people's access to food, whether it's being grown in the fields nearby or it cuts off their access to markets. And so often the women and the girls are the ones that are the vector to get families from, having safety, security, and food, and having access to them.
Yep.
Anyone else?
This whole conversation gets me really pumped and really excited and really jazzed and like really heartfelt and like, oh, yes, we could do something here, and it also feels so affirming to be a female and be like, yeah, we're badasses. Like we have big, big, big impacts just by being. And then there's like, I've been studying and feeling and moving and being a part of this for, 10 years and I fit 20 years. And that feels like a small amount of time. And it's still, and it's still, right. And it just feels, and especially what's happening right now in the States and, the most vulnerable populations and having a full come to Jesus moment or whatever in our country. But it's like waking up again and again and again and again. And how do you shift the systems? How do you shift them locally, globally? And that it takes a long time. But then also feeling really hopeful about the pockets that it is really experiencing a lot of growth and movement. And so just thoughts, I guess, but it's wild to kind of think about it, how long it truly takes and how long does it take ? So just kind of seeing, it's nice to hear from you about your experience and how the needle is moving, and to witness it in other areas as well. And sometimes like you kind of mentioned like you said something like progress or something with the TVs coming in, and then you kind of stopped yourself and said, okay, maybe change, right? And to recognize that like the needle is moving, and is it always for the good, or is it the system is changing, but it's going good and whatever else, funky, and that's just part of change. But yes, and just putting my voice.
Yes, and yeah. Thank you.
So, hi everybody. So my thoughts on listening. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes, thank
Can
you.
you hear me? So my thoughts as I'm listening is that there are so many cultural, financial, logistical obstacles to, to educating girls, and, in a country, in an area that is, that it's a disruptive force, right? Positively, I would say positively disruptive force, but still disruptive in so many different ways. And so I think it is so important to measure success one girl at a time, because each and every single one is so important and has the impact then to, further it. So it's important not to get, I think, discouraged or, discouraged by us, the seemingly insurmountable forces out there, but just celebrate each singular success out there, right? That is so important in a region like, in a country like Pakistan, in a country like the United States, actually, even right now. So those are my thoughts as I'm listening to you all speak.
Thank you for sharing that. I like how you said it is breaking it down, making it more digestible, one girl at a time. Don't get discouraged. And I think that's an amazing, or that's a very important theme to hold on to when considering what action you can take as an individual.
Yeah, I'm sure the investment is huge, right? And the payback may not be immediately visible or even measurable. You know, it might be, you know, a rounding error. But it's so important, like each individual person and that success is so important to recognize and to celebrate.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think we're about to be pulled back into the large group now.
Yep, exactly. Do all of you have this closed now, like on your breakout rooms? Or maybe that's just me.
Let's see. Can you see? Oops.
Oh.
Uh-oh. Sorry. Return to main.
Oh.
Global for generations. And breaking that down to something that you as an individual can do as action you can take, you can consider sharing what you've learned, sharing what you know, continuing to talk about this, the importance of and raising awareness around the importance of girls' education globally. You can look at each one of these girls that you see right here is the next generation of change maker. They are the first generation of girls in northern Pakistan to have an education. Not a single one of these girls has an auntie or a mom who has been able to go to school. They are the first ones. And Pakistan is going to look very different. So in our breakout group, we talked about how long does it take? It does not take long. These girls have only had 12 years access to education, and they are changing the face of their region in northern Pakistan. And that is going to have a global effect within generations. Okay, so it's not going to take that long. It is one girl at a time. We can't get discouraged. We can look at how each one of these girls, it only costs barely $100 a year to provide her with an education. We can find organizations globally like ICRA Fund that support girls like these globally, and it doesn't cost much. Like for us, it's really just about $100 a year that we can be supporting one girl at a time. So to close, please reach out to me with any questions, any inspirations, any ideas for actions for change. If you're interested in partnering with ICRA Fund somehow to get more of these girls in school, please reach out. You have access to our website on social media, and with the traveling school, it's www.iqrafund.org. My email is genevieve@icrafund.org. The traveling school will share my information with you. Please get involved if you're inspired. I wouldn't be here without the traveling school. I'm about to pass it off to Anj, who's going to close the session. And one thing that I know she's going to share is that we have a girls' scholarship opportunity at the traveling school. These girls right here on your screen wouldn't be where they are right now without the traveling school and my work with the traveling school. And I know that every single girl that we can provide an education for at the traveling school is going to be a change maker, and she's going to have her own ripple effect as well. So thank you again so much for coming. I'll pass it off to Anj.
Wow, thank you, Genevieve. I can't see myself, so I hope that can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I got the chills thinking about someday having a girl from the ICRA Fund come on a traveling school semester or multiple. And I just think that would be so powerful for everybody involved. And I think one of the amazing things that I was reminded of tonight, listening to Genevieve's talk, is just that through all of this craziness and having to stay home, we've just been able to reconnect with so many incredible women. And now we get to learn with them and through them about where their lives have gone since the traveling school. And so thank you, Genevieve, for traveling. Thank you for being a part of the traveling school and for just going through life with intention and this willingness to share your inspiration for positive change. So you went out on a limb and it's just affected all of these lives and it will for generations. So thank you for doing that. And thank you all for spending your Thursday evening with the traveling school and with Genevieve. This living room learning series is new for us. It's really exciting. We hope you join us again on Monday's our next one. So yeah, I hope you can continue to learn and share your time. These are donation based, and if you haven't given yet, if you can consider any amount, it will go to making a difference in one girl's life to get her to the traveling school, and it will ripple through every student on that semester and beyond. So, and thank you to those who have already donated. We appreciate you all, and we hope you have a great night. And like Genevieve said, reach out if you have questions. We're here, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye. Khudafis.